Thank you, Arvind. I'm going to talk about, I think, Arvind, the definition of success everyone has to, of ambition has to look up, and it's the sincere striving for achievement or success. So I really want to talk about why I think, and it's about my views and why I think the way I think, and perhaps that will spark a debate about why I think Scotland is a very ambitious nation and has an abundance, and I mean an abundance of ambitious people. Before doing that, the poll that Arvind referred to, which I think was in the Herald, I think this was, which was surveyed, I think, over 1,000 Scottish people, and asked them who they felt their modern day most ambitious person was, their latter day one, which country was most ambitious. And I wanted to make a few observations that might help stimulate some of the debate. It was interesting to note that the top three, I think, in the modern day most ambitious people in Scotland, viewed by the people surveyed, was Andy Murray, Sir Alex Ferguson, Sir Chris Hoy. And it's no coincidence that these people have massive exposure. They have massive exposure in the media. It would be hard pushed to go through a week where you didn't actually see them quite often on TV. And if you look at the linkage of when Andy Murray, and I suppose during Wimbledon especially, when Wimbledon's on, more of the public actually play tennis. And when the World Cup's on, more people play football. And of course, after Sir Chris Hoy and his team did so fantastically in the last Olympics, there's certainly more people cycling. Maybe eating more bran flakes as well, I have to say. But I think the key message in there is that the first thing in being ambitious is there's a link between exposure, and that's the exposure of people who have been seen to be ambitious and succeed and achieve, with the perceptions that we have of that. And if you look at what people do during sporting tournaments, you actually see a change in behaviour. So if it's not a hard thing to link exposure to actually a change in behaviour, that's what hopefully I'm going to explain why I think that happens in a very entrepreneurial Scotland. A slight other observation, I don't know, how many people have actually heard of the poll or read the poll? 4, 5, so. The poll is interesting, another observation, that there's a slight gender imbalance in the poll. I don't know if you picked that up. And when I say gender imbalance, there's actually, imbalance is the wrong one because there's absolutely no women in the poll. And my perception of all of that is, well, what does that do to change your perception about which gender is ambitious and which gender isn't? So I think even in the poll, it stimulates in my mind that the exposure to the poll stimulates a bit of a debate. And I think I would use Andy Murray as an example. I don't know if when you watch him playing tennis, he was on recently, who would you say at this point in time in their life was more ambitious? Is it Andy Murray or is it Judy Murray? Because Judy is fairly excitable at times about her son, and rightly so. So, and if you had to look back on that situation when Andy was an infant and his mother was sacrificing a large part of her life in order to make Andy into what he is today, who would you have said was the more ambitious at that point in time? Would you have said it was Andy, or would you have said it was Judy? So I think the information we've fed, and the point I'm trying to make about that poll is the information we're fed really influences our perceptions on what is ambitious and what's not ambitious, and that changes behaviour. And if we want to change behaviour, we have to change exposure, or shape it at least. And I think ambition, it's all very well saying I want to go from number 4 in the tennis world up to number 1 in the tennis world, and that's a big ambitious task. But there's thin slices of ambition, and it doesn't matter where you are in life. Your ambition when you're a young girl or a boy could be just to get your first serve over the net and into the service box. So ambition isn't the preserve of the famous and the people who have succeeded. It's an ambition to do anything in life. And I think these thin slices of ambition are something I'd like to touch on, because what's the motivation behind actually why people are ambitious and why they're not ambitious? And I think it goes to the belief system. And I want to do a bit of an exercise. And if I say I'm a subscriber to if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're probably right. So this is about what you can and can't believe. I'm going to hand out some Archer's arrows. If I could just put one in each, the first few tables. It's a bit like Christmas, isn't it? And if you could play about with the arrows if you want. And I'll tell you a story about them in a minute. In fact, I've got another spare one, so I'll give you one at the back there. About 3 years ago, I was asked to go on a fire walk. I don't know, has anyone in the audience been on a fire walk before, where you walk over hot coals? Well, it's 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and if you imagine what you see in your barbecue when the coals go white hot, that's what you actually walk on in your bare feet. And someone said, well, Tony Robbins, fairly famous, did this in the States, and I think they had the biggest fire walk ever. So I did a bit of research on the web and thought, well, there's so many people who've done it, and I've actually not heard of many people that have been damaged in many ways. And I've got one spare arrow. What you could do, I want you to play, when you play about these arrows, maybe what you could do is you could actually just press that against your hand and just see how much pressure would it take before you broke through that skin, or even do it on your leg. And remember, my PI insurance doesn't cover me for everybody damaged, so don't do this at home. And on this fire walk, I actually thought to myself, well, I think so many people have done it that I actually believed it must be possible. And I'd seen video clips and watched them on the internet, and I thought, this is definitely a believable thing, I can do it. So we went to the fire walk, and you name the logs, and the logs get put on the fire. It's quite a bit of kerfuffle at times, I must admit. But you get all the logs, and they burn, and the flames are fierce. And as they burn down, you feel the heat intensity on your face, and you think, crikey, this is, I'm not sure if I can do this, and everyone's pumped up to do it. So as way of preparation, what they do is they take you up to a room and say, we're going to prepare you and get you psychologically prepared for taking your feet over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, hot coals, and you essentially get yourself into a mood state, which I was all up for. And the warm-up act was the Archer's arrow. And the warm-up act for the Archer's arrow, if I could ask you, you press it against your hand, you think, this against an immovable object, and then you've got to push this until you get the arrow to break. And you think, that's quite hard. And if you put it against your leg, you think, well, I think it probably would, it might damage my leg. But they say, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to take that, and if you put your finger in that, just above your breastbone where there's a V, you can push into your throat where actually you can almost feel your windpipe. We're going to get you to hold that arrow right in there, and we're going to get you against a movable object, and we're going to get you to push against it and break this arrow. Now, I can tell you right now, I thought, that is impossible. There is no way you could do that. I thought, maybe I've got a softer gullet than everybody else. So you immediately look at everyone and say, I've got a bit of a cold. I don't actually think I could do this. And so there was extreme hesitation in the room. There's probably about 30 people who are going to do this. So they say, who's going to be first? And of course, there was an absolute no rush, because everyone was, well, I'd like just to make sure it was going to happen. So there was a pause and hesitation, so they did some more positive exercise, and by this time you were absolutely petrified, because you thought, there's no way I can do this. They must change something at the very last minute. But they didn't. And actually, it was a young girl that said, I think I'll have a go at this. And she got up and she absolutely pushed forward and broke this arrow against that part of her throat. And I was amazed. And there was a big lesson came out for me. I think I kept my arrow, the other parts in there, and thought to myself, I've got to prove to people I could actually do this. And the big lesson I learned out of all of that was that something you believe is impossible. And I tell you, I've been through some, in running companies for almost 29 years at board level now, I've come across some really deep situations, difficult situations, and I've never, ever come across a situation that I felt was more impossible than that. And that taught me a big lesson that really, possibility and impossibility, the gap of that is knowledge, experience, and exposure. And having seen someone do it, I had the confidence to say, I think I'll give this a bash. They didn't die. And I wasn't second up, just in case you thought I was. I was about sixth. And I think that ambition, I think, if you look at exposure to situations, to people, to experience, changes your perception from it's impossible to it's possible. And that drives the opportunity for ambition. Because if you think something's impossible, therefore your ambition is definitely low. You think, I'm not going to try that, I'm not going to do it. So I think the most important thing is linking these things together, and the exposure that we all have is determined by various things. It's parenting at an early age, and it's all the way through to media, and we all have a role, no matter what profession we're in actually giving people exposure to our experiences to give them confidence and improve their belief system. And I think that definitely will improve the ambition for the country. So I just go back to the initial point in closing here and say that I really think Scotland's a hotbed of ambition. And why do I think that? Because the exposure I've had would lead itself. You have to draw a picture of where all the fingerprint of our experiences in the past, if I had to draw a fingerprint of the things I've experienced, I would think you'd be really surprised if I wasn't really confident that we're in ambitious Scotland. I ran a training company down south. I was CEO, and we helped people start up in business. So over 10 years, we helped 80,000 people start up. So I was exposed to impossible situations, mediocre people trying lots of things and achieving lots of things. So that was fairly well embedded within me that most things were possible. So I had a believability about business. And then up until March, I'd been on the board of the Entrepreneurial Exchange for 5 years. I ran the membership committee, and I had 480 of Scotland's top entrepreneurs, and I liaised with probably at least 2/3 of them on a regular basis. And if you had dinner with Tom Hunter, Tom Farmer, Jim McCall, do you think after that dinner where we had a debate, maybe 14 of us, about a particular aspect of how you grow a business, do you think after that I was more enthused about what I could do? Do you think I believed I could do more? Do you think I could achieve more? You can bet your bottom dollar I did. So my exposure to that emphasised the confidence that I now have about why I think Scotland has an abundance of talent. So my track record is that's why I believe it. And I think other people believe different things, and I think that's because of their fingerprint, of their experiences. But just in closing, I just wanted to tell you about one company I met 6 weeks ago. I had been fortunate enough to be asked to a conference in Barcelona, which was absolutely fantastic to go to Barcelona. So I agreed I'd talk about anything, just tell me what it was. It was about how Scotland was quite entrepreneurial by comparison to other European countries, and people from different countries got up to speak. But I met lots of really interesting people. And 6 weeks ago, I met a company who's really what I would call a European expert. And I don't know if you know, but unmanned aircraft, drones, which fly into war-torn areas, there's two different types. There's the American type, and the American type tell you all sorts of lies. But no, that was a joke, sorry. Don't quote that. But the American type is actually run by someone in Tulsa who has a Game Boy station, and what that person does is guide it through, actually sees on screen what's happening, and it presses buttons to make decisions about what that drone does. The European version actually had its own embedded intelligence, so it flies over a room with 50 people in it, and it decides what action it's going to take according to what it sees. And it has its own intelligence, its own artificial intelligence that makes that decision for it. And you think, that's fairly leading edge stuff. And the fantastic thing about that is the company that developed and is continuing to develop that artificial intelligence is a small company which is run by a female MD out of Edinburgh. It's maybe not a great thing to say in Glasgow, but it's run by a Scottish company. And I think, for me, that was a fantastic, this is a company competing with the world, and it's a Scottish company. And their ambition, some of the things they're doing, I can't tell you about, their ambition is they will be in the news, and they have tremendous ambition because they have a confidence. And the woman who runs it, Angela, is a fantastic woman. She said, we recruit the best people in the world. And she uses a phrase that I just love, which is, we only recruit the Mozart of mathematicians. And I thought I just wish I had thought that one up myself. So, in closing, all I would say is, I believe Scotland is full of ambitious people. It has an abundance of ambitious talent. And I would only reiterate what I've said. If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're probably right. Thank you.